Harry and Meghan are planning a world tour this summer, following on from the success of their trip to Nigeria. Is it true or is it false?
Do you have a different definition of the word success than I do? Because the last one was a catastrophic failure. I mean, let's be real. It was one catastrophe after another. I mean, the woman got a dressing down from the First Lady ironically, about nakedness. And, you know, I don't understand what they think they're doing here. All they have to do is just turn up and smile and wave. That's literally all they had to do. And somehow they got that wrong.
Well, at least they didn't get into the outfits like Justin Trudeau.
God.
I mean, that was a disaster.
Give it time. Give it time.
Harry and Meghan, we've got to be sick of them by now, haven't we?
Yeah, it's just one big PR tour for them. You know, they're always selling products, whether they're flogging jam or flogging books. And, you know, in Nigeria, Meghan claimed she was part Nigerian, and some of the Nigerian populace got quite offended by that. And, you know, so she's going around the world, you know, trying on their cultural necklaces, pretending to be getting involved in activities. But at the end of the day, it's all about her. It's not really about what she's trying to do to help the world. It's about the Meghan Markle show. It's the world tour, the worldwide privacy tour.
No, don't be silly. She's a giving person.
No.
She's lovely.
I've
She uses her status to highlight worthy causes.
Ollie, you're right. She has to call it the worldwide privacy tour.
Yes,
she has to. Like South Park.
Yeah.
That was brilliant.
Yeah.
I find it interesting you bring that up, Ollie, because she said that she felt like she was returning home. And like you said, Home Brother slammed its door in her face, if I'm being brutally honest. You know, this is what really concerns me looking at that tour. The Queen's plan really was to have William and Kate and Harry and Meghan kind of travelling the world as British ambassadors. You know, that was the kind of plan. I looked at how terrible they handled that tour. And my God, they could have started World War III, let alone
they managed to be the least honest deposed prince and princesses in all of Nigeria.
The least honest deposed prince and princess in Nigeria. Yeah, you're right. That is a low bar, actually. I get very spirited emails all the time.
Is that a new category in the Oscars or something?
But Sam, what is the point of all this? I mean, is it just purely commercial?
Look, these are guys that want to prove a point, right? Which is they can do better than, I'm sure Harry refers to Prince of Wales as his bald brother, and Meghan, we know, hates Kate. And I think what they're trying to do is show that they've still got it, they can do it. And of course, you can never forget that they have to do something to keep Spotify, to keep Netflix interested, all of whom have written them a cheque for hundreds of millions of dollars in order to produce something. And so far, haven't got much for it.
No, well, I mean, they got dropped by Spotify for having no listeners, didn't they? I mean, I remember when the whale noises were doing better than them. It's Netflix, really? Doomed.
Was that the Prince of Wales?
Unbelievable. I think the other great thing, Ollie, about Harry was when he admitted or claimed that shards of dog bone entered his buttocks after a fight with his older brother. I mean, you know, if you had been violated by a dog bowl, you wouldn't admit it, would it?
No, you wouldn't. And I think, you know, going back to his book Spare, I think there are a lot of things in there that should have been kept private, because we all know the royal family, of course, they're doing public duties, but they do need that privacy respected. So I think he was very oversharing with that. And I think the royal family's concern now is, you know, every time they see Harry or speak to him, he's just going to then go speak on his Netflix show or speak about it on an interview or a podcast and stuff. And I think, you know, there has to be a red line when it comes to the privacy of the royal family.
I've got to be honest with you, Phil. I'm sure that's the reason why they were desperate to get him out of the estate where Windsor Castle is, because, you know, who knows whether film crews would turn up and whatever. And also, the other thing is, anything that has even a little bit of truth in it, he will just spin out of all proportion, won't he?
Well, spin out of proportion, and not only that, I mean, I wouldn't even trust him by telling him what the weather's doing at the moment, to be honest. I've never known anything like it. How can you go from being sort of a member of the royal family, where their raison d'etre is never complain, never explain, to suddenly being the most open book since the Wikipedia launched? Do you know what I mean? It's just the most bizarre thing.
I mean, it's funny, isn't it? But we do know he's read Spur because he did the audio book, didn't he?
Yeah, well,
so that's probably the first time he'd seen it.
You know, there's been great advancements in AI, so, you know, it might just be his voice. But it's interesting with Spur. I think it's the greatest advertisement of why you shouldn't do therapy.
Yeah.
Because he seems to have gone down this path. And I look back at the old Prince Harry, the guy I used to call the nation's lad. You know, he was having parties, he was hanging out with supermodels. He was just basically being
He was
like
wearing
the
Nazi costumes.
Well, you know, we all do things when we're young. But,
that's getting ended out. Those were young, impetuous days.
No, but this is what I'm saying. I look at him then and I look at him now, and it's clear that he is miserable.
Yes, he is.
It is absolutely clear. And now it might be missing his family, it might be regretting some of his actions, but, you know, there's these things called consequences, and he's got to handle it.
OK, but is he going on a worldwide privacy tour? No, I'm lying. Is he going on a worldwide tour with Meghan? Is it true or is it false?
It's true.
It's absolutely true. OK, to Sam, Robert De Niro has been stripped of a Hollywood award following his criticism of Donald Trump. Is it true or is it false? I hope this is true, by the way.
Well, look, it wasn't just criticism, right? This guy came and gave a deranged press conference. He'd clearly seen himself in some of his old mafia films and thought to himself, I know, I'm the Don to take on the Donald, and came down to the courthouse and basically said, if you re-elect Donald Trump, the United States of America is going to disintegrate into the ocean. We're all going to die. It's all going to be over. It's all going to be the worst thing. And then 2 weeks later, he expected to go and pick up an award from an impartial, bipartisan award that's received a degree of government funding. And it just wasn't going to wash it.
It's amazing, though, isn't it, to say, if you elect Donald Trump, it's going to be the end of democracy. So what we should do instead is have a kangaroo court and throw him in prison for something he didn't do. Well, that's defence of democracy.
I think this is the exact point, and derangement is the right word as well. I call it Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
The way that some people got themselves so worked up by Donald Trump is I still do not understand. Like, don't get me wrong, you are entitled to disagree with the man. However, you're not entitled to pervert an entire justice system. You're not entitled to pervert the media. You're not entitled to use the institutions at somebody's power against your own personal vendetta.
It's like that.
And that's, I'm sorry, and that's what this kind of became for these people. It became personal, and they used everything they had. And I think they've become the villain of their own stories. And they basically just put him back in office.
Ollie, I have to say to you, I remember one of my friends was speaking to Margaret Thatcher, and she discovered that it was offensive to the left for her simply being alive, which was something she was absolutely delighted about. There's something brilliant, though, isn't there, about these people that just upset the lefties just by sheer virtue of existing.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot of Hollywood liberals that have Trump derangement syndrome. They're absolutely obsessed on hating with Trump, and they can get very bitter. I mean, we saw Robert De Niro going on that tirade outside the courthouse, and it actually just made you feel sorry for him. You think this is a guy in his 80s, he's done some great movies, and look, he just appears that he's got this condition where he's just obsessed with hating on Trump, and it's like, you know, these people are out of touch because they don't read the room. The majority of Americans love and support Trump. You see thousands turn up to his rallies waving US flags. They're very patriotic. You don't see the same crowds at Biden campaign rallies when he's falling asleep. You know, you don't see the same enthusiasm. So these Hollywood celebrities like Robert De Niro, they're just so out of touch.
You quite like winding up lefties on Twitter, don't you?
I I don't wind them up on purpose, but they're so easy to wind up. You know, you post something about woke culture or some crazy trans thing, and like they just go crazy. And you know, I just leave them to it because they're going to get angry about anything. So just leave them to it.
I think you're right, Phil. It must be absolutely exhausting to continually be outraged, like ad infinitum. I don't understand it, and because. You know, the way that many of the non-woke people, or I like to call us normal people, look at the world. I'm going to get.
I don't think you can say that looking at this panel.
Are you saying that it's wrong for people to be outraged? Because you do get occasionally upset yourself, don't you?
Okay, so this is the thing. I don't get outraged because I have low expectations of pretty much everybody. Yeah. I find if you live your life expecting the worst, well, you're in my eye line, Phil. But no, if you live your life expecting the worst and then something good happens, you know, you're always pleasantly surprised. And it's worked for me so far.
Oh, what a depressing thought. I mean, you know what? I'm just
no wonder you're anti-therapy.
Yeah, that's right. My therapy is a bottle of vodka.
Yeah.
Okay. So has Robert De Niro been stripped of an award following criticism of Donald Trump? Is it true or is it false?
It's true.
It's absolutely true. Okay, Ollie. Emmanuel Macron has called a snap election in France after realising Europe is heading for a right-wing takeover. Is it true or is it false? I'm banned from saying anything about Macron.
Are you? Oh, gosh, what did you say about his wife?
Not really his wife. Okay, sorry, go on.
Well, Macron's party saw a crushing defeat compared to Marine Le Pen. Marine Le Pen soared with over 30% of the vote. Macron struggled about 15.2%. So that was a huge humiliation for Macron. And, you know, we see it every single day. We know the French like their protests and riots. unrest, but every day there is growing unrest. And there really has been a rise in across Europe. We saw in Austria, in Germany, Belgium, of right-wing parties being elected because people have had enough of not being listened to by politicians. When you've got mass illegal immigration coming to countries, when there's an increase in crime, when there's an increase in terror attacks, and nothing is being done about it, you are ignoring what the people want. So I think people have really shown that they've had enough of these EU bureaucrats.
Phil, here's the thing that I find extraordinary about all of this. No opinion poll anywhere in Europe has ever been in favour of mass immigration, and yet all these political leaders like Macron seem to absolutely love it.
Well, I can explain that very easily. It's because they know what's best for us.
Oh, of course.
So much.
How
on earth could we, as voters, whether we be in France, in this country, wherever it is, how could we possibly know as much as those great leaders of ours? We can't.
It's
We're
absolutely
stupid.
shocking. I mean, I just wonder with Macron. I mean, the great thing about being French, Sam, and there are a few
no
good
one
things.
ever.
There are a few good things. Baguettes are quite good.
You don't have to be French to enjoy baguette.
Yes, you do. Croissants as well. But one of the great things about being a French political leader is the public will tell you what they think. I can't understand how hard it is to ignore them.
Yeah, you get that. You get the permanent threat of being guillotined and the ability to conduct as many affairs as you possibly wish.
Yeah.
Actually, I'll tell you what, if this doesn't work out, I might go and start French politics.
Yeah, it's absolutely right. And for those that don't know, because of privacy laws in France, you are allowed to cheat on your wife and the public will never know. Not saying that Macron's doing that.
Yeah.
Just want to be absolutely clear.
Although it is actually quite disconcerting. Have you seen that the chap who could be the next Prime Minister of France is 28 years old?
The right in Europe has got its act together. It's no longer these fringe elements. They have understood how to play the game. For a long time, Marine Le Pen backed every radical cause and was just looking for headline after headline after headline. What she's been able to do now is to call things out that are wrong. She's looking like the reasonable person in the room. And this is what you have to remember. Marine Le Pen was created by the failures of the establishment. Things like
Well, she was probably created by a dad. It was in the business
I was
himself.
going to say, there is something mildly
But
disconcerting, though, of Le Pen's heritage that means that she's the most sensible option.
Yes, but
That's
no.
right.
Yeah, but and this is the thing. Things like Brexit, things like Donald Trump, Marine Le Pen, the Italian Prime Minister, the AfD in Germany, they were created because the mainstream and the centre forgot to listen to people. And this is the thing. You're perpetually creating the thing that you hate, and you've got to stop.
I've got to be honest with you, Ollie. I mean, your book, Gender Madness, goes through this whole idea of forcing young people into transitioning from being a man to a woman to a man. And that's been part of it, hasn't it? The way that there just seems to be this political correctness which forces people down a route which is just not good for society.
Yeah, and people have now had enough. People are rejecting that now in terms of the transgenderism. We've seen the CAS report. We've seen, the NHS ban puberty blockers, and we've seen huge changes. Recently, the American College of Pediatricians actually said that we need to stop immediately transitioning children. People are rejecting woke culture.
Which, by the way, sounds like an eminently sensible thing. I mean, the idea of giving puberty blocks. I mean, we've got banknotes with Alan Turing on, who was given the same drugs forcibly that we're prescribing to kids. It's madness.
It's madness, and now people are rejecting that, whether it comes to woke culture, all of these kind of far-left people trying to force things down people's throats. And, what happens to just having a conversation? We used to be a society where, whether you're left-wing or right-wing, you can agree to disagree and have a chat about it. But now it's these extremities being pushed on people. And with the EU elections, that is a rejection of that. People have had enough.
I've got to say to all of you, during the election in this country, there's going to be all sorts of violence, throwing things at people, whatever. I just think the whole thing is a real disgrace. I think the woke brigade actually are really dangerous for society.
I completely agree, but I go back to my central tenet of what I think is the main problem in society right now, and it's the most prevalent form of bigotry is a bigotry of low expectations. What our politics has done now is if you believe in a certain thing, the other group will think you're either stupid or you've believed a lie or you're being dishonest. That is the problem. We no longer can have, like Ollie said, we can agree to disagree. You can have opposing views and respect each other. What it is now is if you don't agree with me, you're a bad person.
Yes, that's right.
And that is a dangerous place for our politics to
And
be.
do you know where I blame for that? I blame the rise of social media, because what happens is you've got a platform now where not only your voice apparently matters, when clearly to a lot of these morons it doesn't. And not only that, it means that they can go looking for information that is, whether it's false or true, to verify their stance. So therefore, if they find it online, it's more than likely that what they describe as the mainstream media is not talking about it. Therefore, they're the ones who are covering up. They're lying. They're in on the conspiracy. But I found it online from someone who's just posted something in his back bedroom, so I must be telling the truth.
Yeah. I found that with Brexit, this whole idea that it wasn't possible for you just to go, do you know what? I just don't want to be part of a pan-European superstate. You had to be a secret racist, or you had to be a liar, or you had to have believed something. I mean, the whole thing, what's on the side of a bus? Who cares, right? I mean, the whole idea, and you always got the sense that they were always going to find a reason to justify saying that we'd been lied to.
Yeah, but fundamentally, I think it also boils down to institutional decline. In other words, the great offices of state and the institutions that hold the state together, nobody trusts them anymore. The media is considered a joke to pretty much everybody now. The courts are being torn apart. Parliament is just a farce. These institutions at once you could have at least some semblance of trust in them. That doesn't exist anymore. And because you cannot trust this, anything can become true. And that's why you get the person in the back bedroom being believed.
Sam, is it just only about immigration, or is there more to this?
Well,
I mean, across Europe, not just in France, as we said.
Look, immigration is the elephant in the room right across these places. And why shouldn't
the boat in the room?
Literally, tens of millions of people have been imported to Europe against the clearly expressed wishes of the European people. I saw a chart this week when they were showing the levels of anti-immigration sentiment in Europe. They had to start the chart on 50% of people being concerned about migration. There is no country in Europe whatsoever in which the public are not overwhelmingly opposed to the majority of migration. And by the way, that goes for the left and the right. It's not just that right-wing voters are being ignored, it's left-wing voters are being ignored. Everybody seems to get this issue, other than the 12 blokes that seem to be running the entire continent.
I'll tell you what I found extraordinary, the whole Angela Merkel thing, where it was almost the equivalent of what she tried to do with Poland and Hungary. It was almost the equivalent of holding a Christmas party and then telling your next-door neighbour that the guests were going to sleep in his house. I mean, she sort of invited everyone in and then told the rest of Europe they had to keep them.
But that's the point, though, isn't it? And I was just thinking that what is the EU going to do next? Because the EU will never admit that it got this wrong.
No.
They will never admit that they got the entire issue of immigration wrong. And my fear is I'm expecting a greater crackdown on freedom of speech, freedom of expression. They've already tried to get rid of the AfD in Germany. I'm expecting even more propaganda to be poured out against Marine Le Pen. I think you're about to see just how powerful the EU can be to defend itself.
Yes.
And when like any animal is wounded, backed into a corner, it will be very vicious.
Yeah, it's a worry, isn't it? Because the problem with any anti-democratic or undemocratic state, they have the ability to get nasty in the way that Pete described.
Yeah, and of course they've given themselves powers under secret EU laws to shut down conversations on social media. It's got one of the world's toughest so-called anti-hate speech laws. Quite what the EU, a trading bloc, supposedly, we were all promised, it's just to do with us being able to go on a holiday and make it a bit easier, is setting laws about what you can and can't say. It's given itself those powers. So this isn't a remote fear. This is something that is here, there, today. And as far as I'm concerned, boy, am I glad to be out of it.
Absolutely right.
The only thing that I think one needs to remember, if you're still undecided whether or not we made the right choice by leaving European Union or not, very simple. Remember, Hitler wanted a European superstate. I'm just saying.
I've got to say, I always remember somebody saying to me once that the European Commission is not undemocratic, it's counter-democratic, because the only way you get on it is if you've been specifically rejected by the voters of your own country.
It's quite interesting for the Remain camp right now, isn't it? Like, they're now advocating joining an institution that is literally populated with Nazis. So it's quite an odd place we find ourselves again.
Unbelievable. OK, so Oli, has Emmanuel Macron called an election? Is it true or is it false?
It's true.
It's absolutely true.
That was The Woke That Was continues after the break. Welcome back to That Was The Woke That Was.
OK, Phil. White men have been... Do you see why we picked you for this one? Like, the palest man ever. Yeah. All he has to do is look at the studio like some sort of skin cancer. OK, Phil, white men have been told they have very little chance of getting on BBC trainee schemes. Is it true or is it false?
Sadly, I know this is absolutely true because I remember reading it this week and being absolutely horrified at how I just think the fact that it is even a thing, the truth is that it's not that they're categorically saying we don't want white people. It's just that there is so much emphasis on encouraging people from other backgrounds and, let me be blunt, other skin colours. Just in a bid to try and look good. It's virtue signalling of the worst possible degree.
I wondered.
So,
I considered setting up a Twitter account, but the problem is I'd get into trouble for it. But whites need not apply, where it tweets out all the jobs that white people are not allowed to apply for. So there's like one central hub. The only problem is I realised the virtue signalling left would make it sound like I was the racist, whereas actually it's an act of anti-racism to highlight it.
But what's so bizarre is that this is it, is that in a bid to try and be all-inclusive, what's happening is that this woke brigade who are doing this are basically being the racists that they're trying to crack down on, in inverted commas. It's very simple. If you turn to someone and say you can't apply to a job based on the colour of your skin, no matter what that colour is, you are racist. It's as simple as.
No, before we go to Peter, I do want to talk to you about this because obviously you're our weekend editor, so I guess technically my boss, though I don't treat you like that.
I can vouch for the truth.
But you've worked for the BBC throughout your career. Would you ever go back now? Or no, actually, forget that as a question. What has changed at the BBC?
When I joined BBC, goodness only knows how long ago, their priority was always about world-class journalism, just being the number one, the leader, the one that all countries around the world look to for inspiration in this great industry of ours. And then suddenly, I reckon it must have been proper full-on around 10 years ago, maybe a bit more, they changed and they thought to themselves, well, we've perfected the journalism side. Now we need to be a world leader in diversity. So what they decided is they were going to set themselves all of these ridiculous targets. But unfortunately, the reason why these targets are ridiculous is because that they were saying to themselves that we've got to, by this date, have this number of people from this minority in situ, or else we have failed. And what they did is that they sort of skipped a bit of the essential training that a lot of the staff there went through in order to make up those quotas. So what happened is that the quality that they were so proud of suddenly disintegrated, and this is why you see so much wrong with the BBC in this day and age, is because they have rushed people, rightly or wrongly, into positions of really quite important status, all in a bid to look like they're being all-inclusive. And unfortunately, what's happened is that once great broadcasting institution has now properly disintegrated as a result of
Oli, is it time to get a BBC Verify unit to verify BBC Verify?
Well, yeah, I mean, all of these fact checkers and verify people, many of them are designed to shut down opinion and shut down. And while it's true, it's good to have some kind of, like on Twitter, community notes, because it shows you if something is inaccurate, which is important to know. Many of these fact checkers, like BBC Verify, are trying to shut down people that
my favourite ever thing on Twitter, where it came up with the community notice, was, I think, wasn't it the Metropolitan Police who said there'd been no instance of anti-Semitism on a Palestinian march? And they were called out for lying about it. Unbelievable.
But it's quite interesting. I want to pick up on something Phil said about, it's about equality, and it's not equality anymore. You've noticed that they start calling it equity, because now a lot of people are cottoning on to this, that they aren't playing this everybody's equal game. It is now this group gets preference, that group doesn't get preference. And they're using language yet again to get around and excuse their own racism, or their own homophobia, or whatever it might be. I actually feel sorry for many minorities now working in these big institutions, because you really don't know, were you picked because you were the best candidate, or were you picked because you ticked a box? I think they are treating people like absolute dirt, and it's got to stop.
Yeah, but hang on. If I was really crap at something but got paid a couple of $100,000 a year to do it, oh shit.
It's not stopped you yet.
Yeah, that's right. But Sam, there is now a hierarchy of people, isn't there? I mean, I always get the sense that if you end up in an argument with somebody actually, you've got to think about who's more likely to win, you or them, in terms of are you more important? So I would say that as a white man, I'm at the bottom of the pile, and then somebody who's a recent migrant would be at the top.
Yeah, but of course, there is one type of diversity that the BBC is meant to actually deliver, which is viewpoint diversity.
Yeah.
It's meant to be, if you're a lefty, you can go on there and spout your rubbish, and if you're a right-winger, you can go on there and talk about what you want to talk about. But over the last few years, viewpoint diversity has gone through the floor at the BBC.
Yes.
I mean, it was always bad. I remember people used to send FOIs to the BBC and ask them, how many newspapers do you subscribe to each newspaper?
I love
Somehow
that.
there were 10 times as many Guardian subscribers than there were Telegraph ones. But nowadays, it's impossible to find a right-wing voice on the television. You know, back in the day, right-wing media commentators used to get booked on the BBC semi-regularly. It was something you did. You were on there. Nowadays, it just doesn't happen.
No.
They interview right-wing politicians because they have to, because regrettably, according to the BBC, they're running the country. But they just don't want to hear from those who.
I mean, is that just before we go any further? That's certainly my personal experience. I used to go on the BBC for a fair amount. Now, I mean, they occasionally phone me, but there's really not much of it. It's the BBC. They want to. Well, I'm not doing that. It sounded like book.
So you know that is actually sort of part and parcel of what I was guessing at, is that rushing people into these positions of great authority within the BBC and not fully understanding the importance of that position they maintain. So there are various editors there now who are suddenly elevated to this status where they are responsible for ensuring that there is balance at all time. They're the ones who ensure the quality of what goes out. But because they've not had the training, they've jumped a couple of paces, they didn't know the way to do it. So, of course, they've rushed through this in order to tick a box. But sadly, it's been to the great detriment of what we used to see.
Do you not remember that story where the head of BBC News had to tell journalists that it was their job to listen to opinions they didn't agree with, and it was particularly over the trans issue. You know, there were people that were threatening to walk out and strike over the fact they had to write about people who didn't believe in the trans ideology. Like, I found that story frightening. I was like, this is supposed to be the national broadcaster. We're having to tell journalists how to do their job.
Because what that means is they literally believe their job is to be propagandists.
Yeah, and that's the
they
point.
Literally
they're
believe
not
that.
journalists, they're propagandists.
Anyway, Phil, white men, no chance at BBC training schemes. Is it true or is it false?
It is, sadly, it's a report that suggests it's absolutely true.
It's absolutely true.
That was The Woke That Was continues after the break. Welcome back to That Was The Woke That Was.
OK, 90% of adults oppose trans women competing in women's sports. Is it true or is it false?
See, I think you keep trying to trick me up every week. Is it only 90%? Because I genuinely don't know this one, because it could go either way. Because I think a lot of people view the trans argument as, you know, people just wanting to get on with their life. You know, don't be mean, don't be nasty. There's no need to be like that. And they get very turned off by many of the anti-woke people that are deliberately misgendering people, and they are being deliberately mean. And I think that the anti-woke, that lot, has to behave better. But then I do think you do have to listen to some people that say, like, women's sports and men's goes in men's sports. Let's not forget that even Keir Starmer, you know, has said that it's common sense. So I genuinely don't know, but I do think that the way we talk about the trans argument has to change, because nobody's listening to it anymore, and it's still a very important issue to talk about.
Ollie, I mean, what are we doing? What are we doing, Ollie? Come on.
Well, you know, I was going to say, all of the people that say, oh, well, maybe trans people can have their own category, certain sports bodies have tried that. You had the World Aquatics Championships in Germany last year. They had created a transgender category in the interest of fairness. Not a single trans athlete applied to be in it, not a single one from across the world. So that shows you...
Well, hang on a second. Can't I just self-define as a woman, be the only person to get a gold medal?
You would get a gold medal, exactly. So
what am I doing?
But, you know, that is just showing you that these trans athletes don't want to be
I'd
put in their own
waddle
category.
all the way down.
Walker.
I tell you what, I remember that in the Olympics when they used to have people who just competed on behalf of small countries in stuff that they weren't very good at. But anyway, Ollie, sorry, continue.
But yeah, so, you know, they had the opportunity to compete in a trans category. They didn't want to. They want to compete in the women's category.
Yeah.
One, they think that they are women. They want to be treated like women. And secondly, they want to win a prize. Many of these athletes were the last in their race, in the men's race, and then suddenly they win. And we're seeing it daily and weekly in the US in running competitions, in swimming competitions. And for a little girl that has spent their whole life training to be an athlete, and then suddenly you've got someone that's come along, 6 foot tall, extra muscle mass, extra body mass, they have a competitive advantage. It is simply
As I've always said, I can't remember what her name is, but that weightlifter that looks like Meatloaf.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you think, whoa, that's a lovely lady there.
I just want to say, just on the flip side, I did read a story of, I think she was a snooker player that was a trans person, and the other player walked off and said, I'm not doing it. And I actually felt really sorry for the trans person, because they just wanted to play. Like, you could just tell that I didn't get that
I'm not convinced that snooker's going to be. I don't know.
Yeah, and I do.
It was like when angling said that they weren't going to allow women to...
Yeah, and I know the chess, for example, they've been in it. But I did genuinely feel sorry for the trans person in that situation. But I think they've been put into a situation where it's kind of out of their control to a degree. That, you know, the institutions of sport have been pushing the trans ideology because they've been infected with the certain people running it. I think, you know, that again, the trans community is being used as a political weapon by both sides.
Well, I don't think, you know, female athletes have had their voice listened to when you've had so many sporting bodies that have pushed this and basically told them to be silent. And there's been many swimmers in the UPenn in America with the Leah Thomas situation. They were threatened to be silent, otherwise we're going to kick you out of the competition. Now we're starting to see women like the snooker player just say, no, I'm not going to be doing this.
Somebody told me that in the United States of America, there's one particular college, I don't know which one it is, where they're secretly awarding 4th, 5th and 6th medals that they bought themselves, because obviously 1st, 2nd and 3rd will just go to trans people. OK, so Peter.
Yes.
I think we know that most people oppose trans women in women's sports, but is the figure 90%? Is it true or is it false?
I genuinely don't. I don't know. I think people... I'm going to go it's false.
It is absolutely false. In fact, it's 66%. I'm just depressed about that thought. OK, Sam. Father Ted creator Graham Linehan has been offered £200,000 to remove his name from his own musical. Is it true or is it false?
Yeah, regrettably, this one's true. This is, you know, one of the great comedic writers of our time. I mean, Father Ted, the IT Crowd, like these. This is a guy that made lots of shows that many people in this country found very, very funny. And he's a while ago made a musical version of the show and tried to put it on, but there's some producers that are on it that have got the contract. They've said basically, because you think what you think, because you say what you say, this show, which by the way has got nothing to do with the trans issue, there's nothing wrong with the work, they love the work, but mere association to you is so toxic that we are prepared to sit on the fact that we have paid you a load of money to write it. In fact, we'll offer you more money to pay you to write it, rather than being associated with you. And that's just madness, because, by the way, nobody turns around and says that about trans activists on the other side.
No, absolutely. Oli, can you tell us exactly what happened? So Graham Linehan basically just took to Twitter just to support women, didn't he?
Yeah, he basically, you know, said that men cannot become women, you know, we need to respect women's spaces, and he's been subject to cancellation just like J.K. Rowling. Yeah. Similarly to the Father Ted creator, you know, J.K. Rowling was also cut out of the Harry Potter anniversary, despite the fact she made billions of dollars for the franchise, despite the fact she made Daniel
And she wrote it.
Yeah. And she wrote it, you know, just because of her tweets where she said that men can't menstruate. And I think it's ridiculous to have that sense of cancel culture, and Sam's right, it doesn't go the other way. You don't get a trans activist being cancelled for saying something shocking on Twitter, and quite often they say much more shocking things.
But this is precisely why these kind of cretins say these things, is because they know there are no consequences. It's exactly the same way. If you think you've got some sort of petulant child and there are no consequences when they misbehave, they're going to grow up to be feral. So when you've got someone who is saying some sort of crackpot theory that anyone can menstruate, no, they can't. Sorry, it's just biological fact. Get over it. But the fact that you've actually got people...
Hang on, hashtag be kind. It's all the be kind
brigade. That's as kind as I get.
No, but that's the point. It's be kind or else.
Yeah,
yes.
That's the point.
But my point is, right, there are no consequences, and as a result of it, they've seen other people who have tried to actually just offer, let's be honest, reasonable scientific logic, be cancelled. I know, but be cancelled. And they're thinking, oh, well, in that case, that's against the rules. We mustn't go on facts anymore. We've got to go on what is best in the world of trans, in the ideology world. You know, it's ridiculous.
But we heard it. I mean, we were talking about Meghan earlier. But we heard it with Oprah Winfrey, didn't we? Well, it's just your truth. And you think, well, no, hang on a second. I mean, this phone is not green. It's not my truth to say it's green. I knew you'd do that, and it didn't work either.
But you might be colourblind, so actually to some people it may be green.
No, it is not green. Right, let's not get into what is and what is not green.
No, but Andre, you're absolutely right. And this is what woke really is about. It is about the erasure of objective truth. And once you do that, you can rewrite society in whatever way you want it to happen. And that is really dangerous. And you know, I think the trans issue, I think, is one of the leading issues within woke. But there's many others that are just as prevalent. And I think the other one is cultural appropriation. I see the same thing. I call it it's like the new scarlet letter. That once you've said something against the trans community, that is it. You will be forever known as the person
I don't understand how people, on the one hand, do not want cultural appropriation, but on the other hand, want us to be culturally enriched. So basically what happens is, if you try and embrace this new culturally enriched thing, then you're culturally appropriating. Basically, why don't we just put a big sign up saying, we hate you, you're white?
Yeah, Andre, you're asking for consistency for people that can't even define what gender they are from a minute to another minute.
Yeah,
so let's walk before we crawl, shall we?
There's a serious point here, though, which is there is a line that runs through basically turning around and saying to someone that you hold an unacceptable view, therefore you can't work. That line runs right through to Nigel Farage, I don't like what you're saying, so I'm going to throw a milkshake at you.
Yes.
So I'm going to throw rocks at you. It basically is an acceptance that you cannot win the argument on the merits. So what you are going to do instead is you are going to shut down that person from talking.
I have to say, whatever takes place in this general election, I just sincerely hope that people can get their points out. And you know what? If you come face to face with a politician you don't like, tell them why you don't like them. That's the whole point of a political debate. But anyway, has Father Ted's been shut down? Is it true or is it false?
It's true.
It's absolutely true. OK, Ollie. Disney has been criticised for giving Snow White a penis in upcoming remake of the film. Is it true or is it false?
Well, nothing surprises me with Disney these days because we know they were trying to replace the dwarves in the upcoming Snow White. They were trying to have them called magical creatures and, of course, ticking every diversity box. So nothing like the original.
I have to say to you, there's a little fella who works at Borough Market who does suffer from dwarfism, and he was going crazy about what happens with Disney because apparently a lot of these guys work for, say, 1 month a year in the theatre, but get enormous pay for it. And suddenly you are taking a group of people who actually are limited in a lot of the jobs they can do and just taking money out of their pocket. So they're not very impressed.
Well, we saw the exact same situation with the flag girls. Do you know, at the Formula One?
Yes.
You know, they were very attractive women with the flag. They got to travel the world, earn some money. And because of some really angry people on the internet, that opportunity was taken away from people. The thing that annoys me the most when it comes to woke is it's being led by people that aren't even listening to the minorities they're supposedly defending and representing. They are just doing this to make themselves look.
But you always when you see on Twitter and they go, it's a disgrace, wolf whistling, it's a disgrace making sexual comments, it's a disgrace walking up to a woman in a pub, you think, you're not going to have that problem. Look at the size of you. And what's that thing on your neck? I think it's always the absolute
it's the chip
beasts
on their shoulder.
Yeah.
No, but Phil, it's always the absolute beasts who kick off.
No, of course it is. But this is, I think, why they're just generally quite bitter people.
Yeah.
This is the thing. This is what we were saying before about how angry people are with the world, with stuff that they can't really change. I mean, sadly, it would appear as though some of these idiots are getting away with changing some of the world now, which is really, I just think, the most offensive thing of all it. Can we just sort of be realistic for a moment here? What we're talking about is many woke issues are basically pandering to the minority in society.
Yes.
Right? So this is what it all boils down to, is if you have, regardless of whether it is balancing what we see on screen, well, I'm sorry, statistics show that actually, if you're talking about diversity of skin tone, it is just a fact that actually a vast majority of this country is still white-skinned. That might be right, it might be wrong, I don't know. I don't really care one way or another personally. I don't look at someone and think, oh no, you're the wrong colour. It doesn't cross my mind, I don't think like that. But if there is someone who has an issue...
I mean, if they were blue, you'd be concerned, wouldn't you?
Well, only because I think they probably needed to get some sort of medical help about half an hour beforehand. But yeah.
Do you know there's a business in the Czech Republic, I'm not joking, owned by a group of dwarves, where if you land at Prague Airport, right, they will chain themselves to you so you can get like when you're going on stag do, the stag, and he has to eat, sleep and go to the toilet with this bloke, and he will come blue and be a smurf if you want.
Excellent. Well, that's really useful to know. I'm sensing I know where the next holiday is. And as far as I'm concerned, it's just the way I look at it, is that if you pander to the minority, whatever that minority is, whether we're talking about the trans, whether we're talking about parts of the LGBTQ community, whatever we're talking about, if you pander to the minority, it means the majority is going to be disgruntled.
Isn't this really an opportunity for you to create a sort of priestly class where you go, we are the enlightened ones, and you all just have to pander to whatever it is we say. And it's a way of gaining power without, say, winning an election or being powerful in an organisation or having any real major contribution. Every time you persuade people to use your language, you change the language and say they don't know what the language is.
Totally. I was going to say 100%, but what I think is why do people do this? And I think it comes from a sense of entitlement.
Yes.
And these people just love to hear their own voices. I find that ironic being sat in this room, but no, not looking at anybody.
Can you imagine being like that?
I know, yeah. But
I love the way you did that with jazz hands as well. Well done.
Well, I learned that from you. But the thing we have to remember, though, is that the people that really push the woke agenda do not usually fall within any of the minority categories. There are certain people within the majority that are looking to feel special.
But Pete, let's be realistic, and we talked about the BBC before. If you are a private school, white, heterosexual, middle-aged man, what better way to prove your worth than boot the ladder of opportunity out of the way for everybody in your category? Because then you get away with being the very person you dislike.
But the best bunch have got to be Queers for Palestine.
I have to say to you, I'm so keen for us to raise the money. Go on a field trip.
Absolutely.
Knock yourself out.
One-way flights for sure.
Absolutely. Save yourself the return.
OK, so Oli...
Turkeys for KFC.
Turkeys for KFC. It's chicken KFC.
I'm mixing my metaphors, aren't I? Sorry. Turkeys for Christmas, chickens for KFC.
Right. A bonus point goes to anybody who can tell us what the C in KFC is. Chicken. Jesus, man, what's wrong with you?
I'm vegetarian.
I prefer the term vegetableist. It sounds more offensive. OK. Oli, has Snow White now got a penis? Is it true or is it false?
It's going to be false.
It is, in fact, thank goodness, false.
That was The Woke That Was continues after the break. Welcome back to That Was The Woke That Was.
Joe Biden's campaign is pinning its hopes on a brain transplant chip designed by Elon Musk. Is it true or is it false?
The only reason I think that this has to be false is because you've got to have a brain in the first place to implant it. Sorry, what? Too soon? Sorry.
Don't worry.
I don't think that sort of we're at the stage yet where world leaders would, ultimately start engaging in this kind of thing. I appreciate that Elon Musk is obviously a bit like sort of the Einstein of his day, where he's like a bit of a wacky scientist who's just trying to implement his sort of bizarre ideas on the world. And to be fair, he's doing quite a good job of it. But I'd say that in terms of actually sort of going to the extent where Neuralink, which is his actual company that has these brain chips, I don't see it. I don't think so.
Do you know what I would do if I was Donald Trump? I'd do something that the Conservatives once used in a mayoral election against Frank Dobson. And I'd go, poor old Joe. He's all right. Poor old Joe. I think you can just be that disparaging towards him.
One of the most powerful phrases in British politics at one point was, doesn't he look tired?
Yeah.
You set that, because then you set the level of, clearly he's...
British politics is vicious, isn't it? He looks tired.
You're all right, though.
Earth
it's
would
the
the
way
word
that we
be
can
to
bring
describe
down.
Biden, then.
I'm not going to say, but this is the thing. We joke around about Joe Biden, being a little bit being senile and falling asleep. But there is a serious point here, is that the world is getting very, very dangerous right now. We are heading towards some big conflicts. We are heading towards a very dangerous time in our history. And I don't think our leaders are taking it seriously, and I don't think many people in the country are taking it seriously. And, you know, we need a strong president, and I just don't think Joe Biden is that.
Sam, how catastrophic has it been to have somebody so weak in the White House?
Well, look, I don't know. I think probably in the morning it's all right. By about 2 o'clock, things are getting a bit more dangerous.
He's just, it's just extraordinary when he lost the front door. And you think, it's quite a big building, I admit that. But you do live in it.
Well, there was a moment this week where he just froze, right?
Yeah.
He just froze, the camera was on him, and someone kind of had to... George Floyd's brother,
They had to sort of wind him up at the back.
Shake him back into existence.
Actually, do you know what? In all of this, I don't blame Biden. You know, I actually get cross with his family because I just think you're looking at someone who you supposedly love and watching them disintegrate before the world stage. What are you doing?
But
I can't possibly think why Joe Biden's family and his son in particular would remain in the White House.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not having that, Sam. Look, Hunter Biden has had a highly successful career in the oil and gas industry, and that qualification of being thrown out of the American Navy for smoking crack is a fair qualification to get you into the oil and gas industry. It's Hunter Biden, he said. Oh, Hunter, come on, it isn't even lunchtime. Anyway.
It's not exactly as if Democrats don't have a history of smoking something and also being a bit funny with laptops.
Indeed. OK, so who do you think is going to win the American election?
I mean, if you go to America, go around all the different states, there's so much support for President Trump. We saw his campaign fundraising smashed all records after his court case. I believe it was about 50 million within a day or two. After the 34 counts by the New York jury. So we've seen the skyrocketing support. We've seen multiple billionaires that were previously Democrat supporters now supporting...
And is that because... the kangaroo court is such a risk to the American democracy that they want to bring it. I mean, I thought it was great when Trump said that he would put an end to this sort of behaviour. He wouldn't prosecute Biden because I've said this on other shows, there was a fear on my part that this was going to become part of the American system. Every former president has to flee the country. All of them are criminally charged. And it just turns into something that's much more like North Korea.
Yeah, and that was the fear, and that seems to be what's happening. It's becoming a banana republic, and there are so many injustices happening now. If you look at the case of Hunter Biden has a trial, that isn't being taken seriously. It's like he's going to get a slap on the wrist.
Yes.
Whereas, but I think it's galvanised so much support for Trump and his base, the campaign donations, the billionaire donors, multiple big companies like Sherry Adelson has donated $100 million to a super PAC. To get him elected. And so I think there's a galvanised support now. So I think whatever Biden does to try and get Trump actually backfires.
I'd agree with that, but I would actually say that at this moment, I think Donald Trump will win the Electoral College, but will lose the popular vote. Right. I think this will be exactly like the last time.
However, it is worth pointing out, and this is the thing that people forget, the purpose of the Electoral College is to ensure that smaller states are listened to. And by the way, they envisaged Hillary Clinton, who was incredibly popular in a small number of states and hated everywhere else. The system was designed to prevent her.
Oh, 100%. And I find it absolutely staggering that the entire time Donald Trump was president, they were like, we've got to get rid of the Electoral College. Oh, and then Biden becomes president. Oh, we don't have to do that anymore. Yeah. And I mean, we talk about them being a kangaroo court. We talk about them using the apparatus of the state. It is plain to see. It is undeniable that the Democrats and the left in America are willing to destroy America in the name of protection.
But the other thing about the United States of America, there's no doubt, Sam, that those people who want rid of the Electoral College are the very people who support the overstepping of the federal government and the interference into what goes on in each state. I make that point because you might be able to say, in a more federalistic republic, you might be able to say, well, OK, let them get on with it in Washington. But they are very keen on making changes in states against the wishes of those states.
Yeah, look, these are people that hate democracy. I mean, you only have to look at the Russia hoax, right? They lose an election. What do? They turn around and they say, oh, it was the Russians that did it. Russia interfered. No evidence of that. No evidence of collusion. They conducted this entire multi-year, multi-million-dollar investigation into President Trump and his acolytes, and the only criminal offences they were able to prove were offences that were caused by the investigation, right? They went and interviewed people and somebody lied to them. Right, fine, we're going to get you on that. OK, but if in exchange we turn over some evidence about Donald Trump, and they all said, We don't have any evidence about Donald Trump. The whole thing was a farce, and Hunter Biden's laptop was the peak of
the most extraordinary thing was that John Podesta's brother, on behalf of Hillary Clinton, had gone to the Ukrainian embassy to conspire with them in exactly the way that she accused Donald Trump of conspiring with Russia. It's just absolute madness. And by the way, Ukraine is an ally of the United Kingdom, but the idea that you ask a foreign government to intervene, I think the good thing about the Ukrainians is they basically refused. But anyway, so we're going to ask you, Phil, is it true that Joe Biden's campaign is pinning its hopes on a brain transplant by Elon Musk? Is it true or is it false?
Surprisingly, for now, it's false.
It's absolutely false. And now we come to who's going to win. And look, when I'm looking at Pete Barnes, Sam Armstrong, Oli London, I think, yeah, good guys, and thank you so much for being on the panel. But only one person on the panel tonight is my actual boss. That is Phil Day. So congratulations. Phil wins with 8,486.4 points. See you next time. Goodbye.